I do like technology when it works. We know that's not all the time. Just a little introduction about myself. My name's Aaron Yoder. I work at the University of Nebraska Medical Centre, and we've got lots of acronyms we use because of all these words. I'm in the Department of Environmental, Agricultural, Occupational Health, which is in the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center, which is different than the main campus of the University of Nebraska, which is actually in Lincoln. Which leads to an off-topic subject of Big Ten schools. I've visited 3 of them so far. Graduate studies at Purdue with Dr. Field, and previous to that with Dr. Murphy at Penn State. He grabbed me as an undergraduate and drug me into ag safety and health, probably kicking and screaming, no, I needed a job, right? So I did agricultural safety and health work, and that got me hooked onto it, went to Purdue and followed that up, then went back to Penn State. And some of the programs I'm going to talk about are with the extension experience I had at Penn State. So that's 3 Big Ten schools. I thought I only have 9 more to go. And then they added 2 more this year, so I think I'm giving up to that. But it hasn't been hard to change to a Husker fan since Penn State can't beat an opposing team and the officials. But I won't say any more about the Big Ten schools. So that's a little bit of where I came from. So what I'm going to talk about is more about the resources. The resources I'm going to talk about really have been used both in the formal setting and the non-formal setting, and I'll explain a little bit of how they're adaptable to both of those and how new technology has allowed us to do that. First off, just a brief mention of the Ag Safety and Health Center that I work with. It's a NIOSH-funded center. We've heard some people from NIOSH speak. So these are part of their external programs. The Children's Center's listed on there, and it's hard to read all of those. Other than the Children's Center, the rest of the centers work on occupational safety and health. The Children's Center is focusing more on the children, including the occupational safety. And Barb has explained that a little bit, and others that work with the Children's Center. So we're part of that funding process. We do like to collaborate with others, so use this as a resource. Just want to make sure we do that. We have collaborated with other organizations like Progressive Agriculture. We help them with some resources for their safety day camps in our region and other things like that. So I think there's the opportunity, and then that leads to talking about the networking. People in the room have said, I never heard of this person, never heard of that person, didn't know this was going on. So I feel, and I've always been open to networking. The more we can network, the better it is. We get together at ISASH once a year and talk about stuff like this, but continuing that dialogue and networking throughout that. So the ag centers can help with that, our extension safety specialists and others. So this is a new group that we're working with, trying to emphasize more of the ag education side of things. So I commend the SAFE project for that. One example of what the ag centers do, we recently collaborated amongst all the ag centers, and that's something, collaboration is a word that wasn't always in the extension safety professionals or in all the safety professionals vocabularies, I don't think, but we're seeing more and more collaboration, and a lot of it comes from funding sources and the competition for the funding sources. But we're seeing the rewards of collaborating between centers now. Probably in the next year and a half, when the new center proposals will be coming out, the collaboration will cease. But hopefully it starts back up when the new center rounds come around. But an example of that and a resource that can be used is a YouTube channel. We've used YouTube for different things. I'll talk about it with one of our other training programs. But it's a great place. We know that society now gets a lot of their information off their smartphones. YouTube is one of those programs that works with smartphones. If you post videos up there, it doesn't always work the way it is. So go with the technologies that are out there. Don't try to create your own technologies. So we did that. So we're collaborating with all the other ag centers. We're all putting up videos related to ag safety and health that can be used in various forms. You can see an example there would be our heat illness one that comes from the Western Center. That is multilingual, so there's some Hispanic or Spanish-related resources out there. And it really does have a wide variety of topics out there now. So that's one example of a resource from the ag centers. Another program that was mentioned already 1 or 2 times and is we call it the NSTMLP program. We need to talk to Jim Hilton, who came up with that name. Now he's since gone from Penn State. But so this was one of those original HOSTA grants or USDA farm safety grants that really helped start this project. And this is what drew me back to Penn State after my graduate studies, was working on this project. And I was at Penn State for about 12 years and just recently moved to Nebraska about a year ago. So about 13 years ago, I think, is when this started, the efforts into this. Probably 10 years ago or so, the actual product started rolling out. And so I managed this program for about 10 years. So talking a little bit about what the resources are, how it's used both in the formal and non-formal. In the formal setting, one example of it is every ag educator that leaves Penn State now goes through the instructor training for this program. So one of the ag education instructors at Penn State requires all his students to become a certified certified instructor for this program. So they get a certificate of completion for going through that. Originally, when this program started, we tried to take 2 people from every state. We met in Iowa at Peosta, and it got 2 people with the hopes of them going back to their state and training other people and it spreading that way. We had maybe a handful of states that actually happened. The rest of the states got a free trip to Iowa because I don't think much else came of some of those. So after we tried that and tried to do the instructor trainings, there really wasn't support for that, and it was kind of hard to get that done. So we ended up transitioning to an online instructor training. So the same content and material, minus some of the hands-on stuff, which we heard was really important, and we still feel that too. But sometimes for the instructors, the travel budgets, other things like that, they really couldn't come to the trainings. We still have some states that try some of the face-to-face trainings in cooperation with other events, but it's really the online training where we're training instructors, and I didn't pull up the most recent number, but we're somewhere 500, 600 trained instructors, I believe, in that program over those 10 years that we've accumulated through that. Some of them obviously have left the program by then, but Penn State does a pretty good job now of trying to keep that instructor database up to date, and I think Davis Hill does a lot of the work on that and some others back there. So that's how we've used that, but the materials that are in it, as was mentioned before, they're sort of broken up into the old fact sheet format, so we call them task sheets on different topics, heavily based on some of the core competencies that I know Bill talked about with the Gearing Up program. When both of those programs started, we got together and started to talk about some of those. I think they've gone away from each other a little bit. But both programs were based on the hazardous occupation order in agriculture. So a lot of the content's machinery heavy, but it does offer other topics as well. The materials are used, as we heard, in extension settings. I mentioned ag educators being trained to use them. We have people use it to support classroom settings. There is still a printed manual, and I know in Nebraska, Sherry that's in the room, we give the students the printed manual. So I had the opportunity to go out in a different state this year and help instruct some of those courses and see how they ran in different states. So it goes everything from a traditional classroom setting. The materials are also used, excuse me, in an independent study setting. So we have instructors that require their students to do some homework, some reading of the materials. They give them quizzes, other things like that, sort of like distance education, but now with computers, it's a lot easier and quicker to get that correspondence. So they're used in both of those kind of settings. If they want to meet that HOA regulation, they still need to get together and do the hands-on testing and training. So that's the bottom line with some of those programs. The material can also be used beyond that, and we see people using it as other sources of instruction. For people that don't need that HOA certification, it can be used as an independent study or can be used as a classroom study. Fits well with adult learners or other type of learners. We have adaptions of it that work well with a Hispanic workforce, so we have a lot of that translated into Spanish. So there's a good source of that. I'm also going to be talking in a minute a little bit about the extension or e-extension, and this is an example of how we're using that portal to get this information out. I know the SAY project is using this portal, and you probably see things with e-extension. The interesting thing with e-extension is We just found out that they might be changing the structure of it a little bit, that universities are going to be able to be either a standard level person or a premium level person, and that's going to change what the universities can do with the extension. And Linda may know more about that, but there's an upcoming meeting of the e-extension leadership. Right now we have full access to all the resources of e-extension. If you're part of the extension system or work for one of the universities that are part of the extension system, but I think some of the leadership doesn't feel like paying the full bill for e-extension, so some universities are going to opt out of a lot of the functions of it. So in the next few months, there may be some changes as far as what people can put stuff on there and do things. So we'll have to watch that a little bit as we go through this. One of the things we do on there is e-extension has a, they call it campus.eextension.org. We've developed a online certificate of completion class based on those NSTMLP materials. So now people that are even teaching the HOA course can have their students do the book work in an online environment with quizzes and everything built up. They would still have to do the hands-on testing at the end. But I've had a lot of people go through the course that didn't need that certification, but they get a certificate of completion for completing all the quizzes and that sort of thing. So, but this is one of the services that might go only to the premium schools once they change that pay structure. So it uses, if anybody's familiar with Blackboard or Angel or other course management systems, it's a similar system to that. They use Moodle to do that. So it gives the instructors a little bit of flexibility of the materials they put up in the courses. So this is just another example of how we can do that. You can see over in the side what your local extension pops up. One thing about e-extension is it gives us that local credibility, depending on where you log into the computer from. I pulled this picture when I was in Nebraska, so it says UNL extension there. If you do it in Pennsylvania or Ohio, it does it based on your IP address. So in Louisville, you might end up with Indiana extension or Purdue extension versus Kentucky, but it gives it some local credibility to that. And I guess that's all the resources that I had to talk about. So hopefully we can talk more later, but those are just some of the resources that we've seen used in different ways in both formal and non-formal education.